It was another autumn night in San Francisco. A ghostly white car prowled the avenues, driving by itself with no one behind the wheel. The car was looking for its next human, and it found her. This phantom car rolled over this innocent woman who was caught beneath the car's undercarriage and dragged 20 feet. If you know this news story, then you probably know that the woman thankfully survived. And you also know that the car in question was not compelled by some evil spirit, but by software. On a happier note, the woman's lawyers won a settlement of over $7 million. Autonomous self-driving robo-taxis, for better or for worse, are here. A futuristic fantasy come to life. Of course, driverless cars have been on our minds long before Tesla and Waymo. Ever since automobiles first rolled off Henry Ford's assembly line, we've been imbuing these objects with personality. Maybe it's something about the way these headlights look like eyes.
What an unusual car!
The more reliant we became on our vehicles, the more we began to connect with them. For some of us, they're almost like family. And some storytellers have taken that idea and rolled with it. The premise of the 1960s television show, My Mother the Car, is just as ridiculous as the title suggests. A dead woman's spirit returns to Earth, locked within the confines of a Model T. Later that decade, Disney movies would introduce us to Herbie the Love Bug and a few of his charming companions. These cars didn't need drivers to get around, and it captured the imagination of millions of children. But some self-aware cars on the silver screen weren't always so friendly.
It's precisely all these cars that bother me.
Killdozer, as the moniker suggests, was a killer bulldozer, brought to life by a fallen meteor.
That's a meteor.
By the 1970s, American culture was fixated on the idea of cars coming to life. Some of those deadly vehicles were demonic, like the 1977 film The Car. Others were like a colorful nightmare. So it's not surprising that when a rash of vehicular homicides spread throughout Libertyville, Pennsylvania, that people began to imagine some outlandish possibilities, no doubt inspired by Hollywood's passing obsession with possessed cars. The rumors throughout Libertyville began with the deaths of 1978 and continued into the 80s and beyond. Even today, there are some Libertyville residents that will swear that they have seen a hellish hot rod haunting their streets. The witnesses differ on the make and model, but the car is always from the 1950s, always red, always seen at night, and it is always, at least they claim, driving on its own. Oh, and one more thing. The witnesses always give the car the same name, Christine. Now, this documentary finds no merit in such supernatural rumors, but in order to get to the bottom of this mystery, in order to identify and understand the man behind these murders, it's necessary to examine these gruesome urban legends. And so, let's uncover the sordid history of this car known as Christine, so that we might pave the way to the truth. As mentioned in Part 1, the police gave false information to the press about the events surrounding the destruction of this vehicle, as well as the death of Michael Cunningham. The two people found on the scene were Lee Cabot and Dennis Gilder. Both of them suffered injuries and were taken to the hospital, and eventually they told their bizarre story to Police Inspector Richard Mercer. They claimed that the car had come to life, that it was driving on its own, and so they lured it into the garage where they could trap it and demolish it with the help of Petunia, the pink septic tanker truck. It should be noted that these two high school students were never charged, nor were they ever tested for drug or alcohol use. Suffice to say, Mercer didn't want their story getting out to the press. In the wreckage strewn about the floor of Darnell's do-it-yourself garage, the investigators noticed something bizarre. It seemed like there were too many pieces of Christine, 5 different side mirrors, more than several smashed and disconnected headlamps, 3 different gas caps. One retired officer, who allowed himself to be interviewed but did not wish to be named, stated that it was almost like the Plymouth was refusing to die, that each time the tanker smashed off the piece of Christine, the Fury regenerated itself. But of course, a more realistic possibility is simply that there were lots of extra parts lying around. Ultimately, the police took away the wreckage. The rest of the mess was cleaned up by the garage's last surviving employee, Jimmy Sykes. But some of you might be interested to know that Jimmy didn't stay unemployed for long. There had been a recent job opening at Horlicks University due to the mysterious disappearance of the college's beloved janitor. But let's get back to Christine. Since there are so many rumors and urban legends surrounding this car, it's worth noting the vehicle's history, if only to dispel the hysteria surrounding these events. Since as early as the 1920s, Roland LeBay, the original owner of this car, had worked as an auto mechanic for the United States Army. By all accounts, he was an angry young man who eventually became an angry old man. According to fellow vets who would occasionally drink with him, LeBay maintained an overall hatred and distrust for just about every authority figure. His personality must have made following the orders of his superiors difficult. On 2 occasions, LeBay was thrown in the stockades for insubordination and drunkenness. It was even rumored that he once urinated in a punch bowl. But his mechanical expertise made him an asset worth keeping. So he served during World War II as well as the Korean War. All the while he was fixing, repairing, and maintaining the vehicles of his superiors. It was his dream to have a brand new car of his own. But with a wife and a baby girl, LeBay wasn't able to scrape enough money together to make that dream come true. At least not until he retired from the Army in 1957. His disability pension allowed him to finally purchase a car. He had his eye on a 1958 Fury Sport Coupe. The sticker price was $3,000, perhaps more, since LeBay wanted a particular shade of red, a color not found on other Plymouth Furies made that year. About a year after he made that purchase, he was driving with his family when suddenly his daughter Rita began to choke on a piece of hamburger. Despite her father's efforts to save her, his daughter died on the side of the road. It was every parent's nightmare. Devastated, the mother passed away only 6 months later. She died of carbon monoxide poisoning while sitting inside the car LeBay had lovingly named Christine. So-called paranormal experts believe there might be a different, darker alternative to these already gruesome events. Self-proclaimed medium Gina Limpke provides this theory.
LeBay loved his car more than his family. So as a sacrifice to prove his devotion, he did not try to save his daughter, but instead let her die, not on the side of the road, but inside his car. And did Mrs. LeBay take her own life? Or was it her husband sealing her inside the car so that she would die alone in the poison gas?
A sour and cantankerous widower, Roland LeBay allowed himself to languish. His car did as well. For over a decade, the Plymouth sat in its shed, rusting. And finally, in the summer of '78, he sold the car to Arnold Cunningham. And not long after that, Roland LeBay died. Many believe it was a heart attack, because at 71 he was not in the best of health. But the obituary simply stated that LeBay died suddenly. According to Gina Limpke,
he suddenly ended his life so that his spirit could be infused within the automobile. Don't look at me like I'm crazy.
It seems Cabot and Gilder believed in similar tall tales. By all accounts, neither teenager is a likely suspect, although we did look into whether or not these two could have been accomplices to Arnold Cunningham. But Cabot has plenty of alibis, including the fact that she was not an experienced driver at the time. And Dennis Gilder, Arnold's most devoted friend, couldn't have been responsible for the murders because he had been hospitalized for weeks due to a severe football injury. No, Cabot and Gilder are red herrings in this mystery. They were well-meaning teens who had learned of the LeBay stories, and their imaginations took flight. They truly believed that the car was possessed by LeBay's ghost, and that it was bent on revenge, smashing into houses and running over her enemies, and making all of that mayhem with no one behind the wheel. And how did the teens account for the lack of damage to the pristine Christine? The teenagers believed that the car was magically regenerating itself, as if by dialing back the odometer, the car could turn back the clock, and all dents, scrapes, and shattered glass would repair itself. Despite these ludicrous ideas, to their credit, the two teens were committed to helping their friend, and the best way they thought they could do that was by destroying the object of Arnold's desire. That's a partial explanation of the bizarre events, but it still doesn't explain the death of Michael Cunningham, and it doesn't get us any closer to determining the identity of the murderer. But there is one person that we haven't considered. One man who was in the center of every calamity without anyone knowing, and that man's name is James Sykes. Jimmy to his friends. And who did Jimmy consider his best friend? Arnold Cunningham. Arnie was an outcast at high school, but Jimmy was an outcast among outcasts. Will Darnell and the others considered him feeble-minded. But was he? There's no academic records with his name on it, suggesting that he may have been homeschooled. And since he clearly admired Arnold, perhaps the only person in the garage who showed Jimmy any amount of respect, maybe Sykes wanted to return the favor. Maybe he wanted to do something that Arnold couldn't do for himself. After all, someone was repairing Christine, and that someone must have been a mechanical genius with an unlimited supply of spare parts. People assumed it was Arnold, yet none of the clients at the do-it-yourself garage ever really observed Arnold Cunningham doing the hard work of restoring that car. When Junkins conducted his investigation, he spoke with almost a dozen clients, and some of them had seen Cunningham changing the oil, but no one had observed him repairing the engine or the bodywork or the glass. And if it wasn't Arnold working on it, could it have been Jimmy? Jimmy Sykes had keys to the garage, and he and his mother lived next door to several junkyards. And although Darnell's was locked at night, Jimmy had access, and it is possible that he was secretly restoring the car as a surprise for his friend Arnie. After the vandalism at the airport parking lot, Sykes could have performed the same automotive brilliance, repairing the damage in order to alleviate Cunningham's extreme emotional suffering. Jimmy would have done anything for Arnold, even murder. Perhaps on November 30th, while Arnold Cunningham slept in his bed, Jimmy Sykes was sitting behind the wheel of an old car. Perhaps he was cruising underneath the street lamps of JFK Drive, looking for one of the men who ravaged the Plymouth, scanning the sidewalks, bent on revenge on behalf of Arnold Cunningham. And that's when, allegedly, Sykes could have run over Peter Moochie Welch. But he wouldn't have been behind the wheel of Christine because, as the police pointed out, there were no signs of evidence. Instead, Sykes must have applied his skills to another jalopy, maybe a similar make or a similar model, and maybe this particular car had been painted autumn red in honor of his friend. Perhaps after ditching the murder vehicle among one of Pittsburgh's automotive graveyards, Jimmy remodeled another death car, the same paint color, but this time a more powerful engine, one that could outrun and outmaneuver Buddy Repperton's doomed Camaro. Then, on December 24th, with yet another restored clunker, Sykes could have disposed of Vanderburg, the last of the Vandals, and then set his sights on William Darnell, his employer, not because Jimmy was a disgruntled worker, but because, with Darnell eliminated, Cunningham's legal troubles would go away, or at the very least, Arnold would no longer be expected to testify against Darnell, thus avoiding the wrath of various mob bosses. And if he had been willing to eliminate Darnell, then it would have made sense to finish things up by killing the meddling detective. With all of these chess pieces off the table, Arnold's life could become simple again, all thanks to humble Jimmy Sykes. It's easy to imagine Jimmy wanting to tell his friend all of the deeds that he had done on his behalf. Maybe on January 19th, that is precisely what Jimmy did. Here is our current hypothesis on what may have taken place. Somehow, Michael and Regina learn of Jimmy's involvement and ultimately their son's connection to the murders. Maybe Jimmy confessed to the family, admitting to the killings as a sign of devotion, expecting to be showered with praise. Whatever the circumstances were, if Arnold's parents did learn of their son's scandalous, albeit innocent, connection to these deaths, Michael and Regina may have felt that their family's reputation had been completely shattered. So imagine on January 19th, in shock at their sordid predicament, fearful of the truth coming out, perhaps Michael Cunningham sat alone in the back seat of his son's car and ended things the same way that things ended for Veronica LeBay all those years ago. Stunned by the recent turn of events and feeling trapped, and imagining the dread of her family being subject to ridicule at office parties, Regina Cunningham perhaps made the sudden, impulsive decision to veer into oncoming traffic, unknowingly joining her husband in death, and, always the overbearing parent, taking her son along for the ride. Of course, whether or not Sykes was the killer is purely speculation. There is no DNA evidence connecting him to the crimes. The whereabouts of Jimmy Sykes have been unknown since 1982, when he left Horlicks to go on vacation, somewhere out west, to a certain drive-in movie theater, perhaps? And as to the most bizarre part of the puzzle, it's very likely that Dennis Gilder, knowing Arnold was out of town, snuck into the Cunningham garage to steal the Plymouth. If so, he would have likely discovered the body of Michael Cunningham, which would have only solidified his belief that the car was cursed and must therefore be destroyed. We theorize that Dennis took Christine to Darnell's, where Lee Cabot was waiting to help destroy the car. And before, after, or perhaps during the mayhem of Petunia's dirty work, the body of Michael Cunningham was discarded in the office. Of course, if viewers choose instead to believe the idea of an evil, enchanted car responsible for the murders, I can't stop them for indulging their beliefs. But to me, far more frightening than a ghost car is the idea that a serial killer has escaped justice, that he was methodical enough to track down Sandy Galton 4 years later to complete his maniacal circle. We may never know, and the fog of confusion will not lift as long as people remain quiet. We tried to contact Lee Cabot for this interview, but she married in the early 1980s, changed her name, and seems to have fallen off the grid. We also reached out to Dennis Gilder. He spoke to us very briefly and explained that he did not want to be interviewed for this documentary. But it is interesting to note that shortly after Dennis Gilder learned of Galton's murder, he left behind city life. He quit his job as a junior high school history teacher, and he moved to, of all places, Mackinac Island, a beautiful community in Upper Michigan, a place where all motor vehicles are forbidden. Thank you for watching and listening to the Stephen King Book Club. It took a while to finally tackle Stephen King's novel Christine, and I hope you enjoyed our fake true crime take on the book. As always, we would love to know your favorite parts of these Stephen King tales, whether it's the novel version or the film, so leave a comment and let's keep this book club conversation rolling along. I'm your humble narrator. Good night.